If you're creating a homebrew setting for your next D&D campaign, it will probably contain some powerful factions, from wealthy noble houses to shadowy assassins guilds. That's what this video is going to be about: factions, what role they can play in your world, and how they will interact with the players. This is the third and final part of a series I've been doing here on the channel about creating your first ever homebrew world. And originally I was going to do one video about the rulership and governance of your world, and one video about the factions in your world. However, I've decided to kind of compress these two ideas together, because essentially the monarchy, or whoever is in charge in your D&D setting, is essentially one of the factions at play in the setting, so it makes sense to combine these two topics. We're going to talk about three different kinds of faction in this video: ruling factions, joinable factions, and enemy factions. And I'm going to say the word faction a lot in this video. Before we begin, a quick shout out to my Patreons who support me and my content and this whole channel. If you're on the Tales Arcane Patreon, you get access to weekly encounters, monthly adventures and campaign settings, Patreon only videos. You can find a link to the Patreon down below this video, but also just liking and subbing here on YouTube is also greatly appreciated. Now, let's talk about factions. A faction is just an organisation with some kind of influence and agenda in your setting. And the most important faction in most cases is going to be the ruling faction. This could be a powerful family, a dynasty like the Targaryens in A Song of Ice and Fire, or it could be a group of bureaucrats like the Small Council in the First Law trilogy. Taking time to develop the ruling faction is important because it's really going to influence the world and the way the players interact with it. If, for example, the ruler is a tyrant, then law enforcement and the City Watch are probably going to be heavy-handed and brutal in their methods, and the players are going to see that reflected in the fear and the paranoia among the populace who have to live under these tyrants. On the other hand, if the realm is being led by a fundamentally good faction, the players will probably see that around them. They'll see happy, prosperous small folk, they'll see justice being handed out fairly, they'll see a City Watch that is held to account with corruption being rooted out whenever it occurs. If your homebrew setting is run by a tyrannical authoritarian ruler, the players are likely to be drawn towards plot hooks and any opportunity that involves rebellion and uprising. If they can become freedom fighters against this tyranny, they'll probably jump at the chance. Likewise, if the realm is being led by a wise, fair ruler, then the players are much more likely to potentially seek out that ruler and try to become champions of the ruling faction. The ruling faction also has a big influence on what the society in your setting values and accepts. For example, if the rulers of this realm are powerful mages, a council of powerful spellcasters, then magic is probably going to be very widespread and very accepted throughout society, very respected too. You might find that instead of having mayors and governors, towns and sort of local areas are led by powerful mages, people who have shown exceptional magical skill. Perhaps that's seen as a sign that you are fit to be a leader. The City Watch might have basic cantrips and be kind of primed to use magic instead of resorting to violence. And in fact, players who use violence, who use swords and unmagical accoutrement, might be seen as being uncouth or backwards by this society. On the other hand, the ruling faction might be a theocracy, perhaps a powerful order of religious knights, a bit like the Templars, and you will see that again baked into every level of society. Certain gods and deities might be outlawed and banned, which could create some interesting questions for paladins and clerics in the party. Town halls and other public buildings could have been replaced by temples and places of worship, and the City Watch could have been replaced by groups of zealous monks. The point is, even if you're not planning a campaign where the players have a lot of direct interaction with the ruling faction, it's still worth developing an interesting, dynamic ruling faction that has an influence on the world, because it will make the whole world feel unique, and it will make individual elements within that world feel cohesive. Now, one of my favourite parts about homebrew world building is creating joinable factions. These are organisations that the players can choose to join and actively participate in, rising up through the ranks and gaining more power and influence as a result. A simple example of a joinable faction could be a guild, like an adventurers guild. The players come in at a low level, but they get some basic perks for being part of the guild, like, for example, access to guild contracts to go out and earn money slaying monsters. At first, they're just sleeping in the kind of public dormitories within the guild. They don't get a lot of very very good contracts, they're just going out to fight goblins. But over time, they start working their way up, earning a reputation, getting new sort of ranks and badges within the guild. Eventually, they're advising the guild masters, maybe they become the guild masters. They're sleeping in beautiful private rooms at the top of the guild. Anytime they walk into, they can go to the local guild and be treated like royalty, and they're getting access to the best contracts, going out to slay red dragons and make enormous amounts of gold. The simplest way to develop a joinable faction for your setting is to create an organization and break it down into ranks with clearly defined perks for each rank. In my Riftwater Isles campaign setting, available on Patreon, you can work your way up from the bottom of a pirate organization, joining as a kind of low-level sea bandit and working your way up to become kind of a high officer within one of these pirate factions. Initially, when you join, you don't really get that much. You can kind of drink at the same taverns as some of the people higher up in the faction, and you get a bit of positive association. People maybe respect you or help you out a little bit more because you're kind of linked to the faction. Over time, you complete missions and quests for the pirate faction, and that allows you to move up the ranks. So you might go out and take on a certain number of enemy pirate ships, or raid a certain number of merchants, or find a rare pirate artifact and bring it back to the head captain. And over time, that earns you a place in the higher ranks of the organization. And as you move up, you get perks like, for example, it takes less time to find a new crew for your ship, or it costs you less money, and eventually it costs you no money at all to crew your ship, because so many people from within the pirate faction are eager to sign up and get on board. And that's the kind of the idea that over time, your reputation grows, you're growing the reputation and wealth of the organization that you're a part of, and eventually, for example, in one of the factions is called the Storm Singers, you can rise up to become a Storm Marshal, which essentially means you're the very top of the organization and you're the sort of close advisor to the Tark Waterman, the sort of pirate captain who runs the entire Storm Singer organization. And in that position, you're basically one of the most powerful people in the setting. A joinable faction is just a very tangible way for the players to get a sense of progression within the society of your D&D setting. Sure, they're leveling up, sure, they're getting more gold, but over time, they're also getting more respect and renown within this clearly structured hierarchical organization. They're working their way up to become the leader of a guild, or of the Harpers, or of the Storm Singers, or whatever organization they're a part of. And the other cool thing about joining a certain faction is it almost certainly puts you at odds with rival factions, which brings us to the next part of this video, which is enemy factions. A faction can also play a really fun antagonistic role in your setting. Sure, you have a BBEG, but now put that BBEG at the top of a large hierarchical organization, and then have the players fight their way up through each level of that organization to get to the BBEG. Let's say that your players have to defeat a powerful bandit faction, a group of organized bandits very well armed and well equipped and led by a powerful bandit lord called the Bloody Baron. And we'll call the faction the Widowmakers, because they're out here killing folk and making widows. Now let's break the organization down into, say, 4 levels, and at the very top we have the Bloody Baron, the Bandit Lord and the final boss of this campaign, or at least this arc within the campaign. Under him you'll have a couple of lieutenants, and these aren't just your regular lieutenants, these are the right-hand people to the Bloody Baron himself. So you maybe have only 3 of these, but they'll be very interesting, dynamic sort of mini-bosses. One might be a kind of roguey, sneaky type, another might be a spellcaster, and the third might be a big, brutish, barbarian type character. These individual lieutenants will all be fought in different locales, they'll have their own bases and their own people fighting with them, and the players will probably have to go through all 3 of them, or at least 2 of them, before kind of earning that shot at the Bloody Baron himself. Under each lieutenant, we have a bunch of bandit captains. These are people who have a bit of authority within the organization, but they're nowhere near the Bloody Baron himself. They're not actually interacting with the Bloody Baron, they're just speaking with the lieutenants and taking orders from there. And these will be sort of almost very low-level mini-bosses that your players might encounter out in the world. You might have maybe 5 or 6 of these, and the players don't have to encounter all of them, maybe just 1 or 2 as the adventure begins to heat up. And of course, under these bandit captains, we have just the regular milieu of the bandits and thugs and footpads who have signed up to this organization. Essentially the minions and cannon fodder who will be the first line of defense that the players carve through on their way to the higher ups. Of course, you could use this structure for any kind of faction. These could be the different figures within a powerful, noble family, the ruling family that the players are rebelling against. These could be the different kind of acolytes within a cult working up towards the powerful cult leader. The point is, you're, much like with the joinable factions, creating a structure that the players can feel a strong sense of progression as they move through. They know that every kind of level of the structure they defeat, they're moving closer to the final boss and the big conclusion of the story. I think the thing that I love about putting a BBEG at the top of a hierarchical structure is that it allows the BBEG to have influence and agency in the world long before the players actually have direct contact with the BBEG. The Bloody Baron might sound super scary from a distance, but when the players finally meet the Bloody Baron, they're going to start landing crits on him, they're going to start chipping away at his health and doing whole person on him, and they're going to realise that yes, this is an enemy like any other, and maybe a very tough enemy, but still an enemy that they can probably kill, and probably will. And that's going to take away some of that mystique. But if they can't reach the Bloody Baron without going through all these other people, they're constantly going to feel that they're up against the Bloody Baron, but the mystery will not be lost until the very end. They keep on going up against these increasingly difficult people, their plans are being foiled, their best favourite NPCs are being threatened, and all the while they feel the hand of the Bloody Baron, the hand of the BBEG, without actually seeing them face to face. And I just think it's a very valuable thing, especially if you're planning to run a BBEG across a long campaign. So as you're developing your setting, you want to think about those three factions. The ruling faction and the influence they have in shaping the culture and society of your D&D setting. Even if the players never have direct interaction with the rulers of the realm that they're adventuring through, it's still worth knowing who these rulers are and what kind of society they're building below them. Then we've got the joinable factions. We've got the organizations that your players can choose to get involved with to get that real sense that they are progressing in society, that they are working their way up rank over rank to become more powerful and influential, beyond just things like character level and magic items. They're getting societal power through association with one of these organizations. And finally, we have the enemy faction. We have the BBEG's organization, and the players can once again work their way up through that rank by rank, defeating minor bosses, defeating the lieutenants, and finally coming face to face with the BBEG. If you've got these factions in place, if you've got all the lore and history that we talked about from the previous video, and if, going back to the first video, you've got all of this taking place on a map that is scaled to match the scope and the size of the adventure you want to run, I think you've got pretty much everything you need for your first D&D homebrew setting. Obviously, you're going to add to this as you go along, you're going to develop it in new ways as your players interact with the world, but these are the building blocks, and I think you can build something pretty incredible with them. Thank you for making it this far in the video, and if you've watched the other two videos in this series, the one on the sort of scale of your map and your geography, and the one on history and lore, I hope the three videos together have given you some useful information and sparked some ideas for your homebrew settings. I think as a DM, even if we start running pre-written modules and pre-written campaign settings, sooner or later we all get that itch, or most of us get that itch, to create something of our own, create our own worlds. And it is the most rewarding thing I think you can do as a DM, is create your own world and then put the players in there and have them experience it in front of you and have them take it in ways that you never expected, explore areas that you didn't think you'd have to develop, but now you're developing them, and it's this wonderful collaborative process. Anyway, thank you for watching. If you are interested in my Patreon, as I said before, there's a link down below this video, but just liking and subbing is fantastic for the YouTube channel, which I'm trying to grow here at the moment. And yeah, I'll see you again in the next video.